Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. The St. Louis County Board of Elections conducts all public elections within St. Louis County. At the head of the Board of Elections is the Board of Election Commissioners. Under them are two directors of election, one Democrat and one Republican. Our guest today is the Republican Director of Elections for St. Louis County, Gary Fuhr. Mr. Fuhr is a retired FBI special agent. He was elected to the Missouri House of Representatives in 2010, but left office in late 2012 when appointed to his election position. Today we are going to learn about the election process, the planning required before running the election on Election Day, and what goes on after the polls close. Gary Fuhr, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you, Lee. It's nice to be here.
So you've been in this job as the election director since when? Last year?
Since October 1st of 2012, yes.
So they just sort of threw you in just before the presidential, the most important election.
5 weeks before the presidential election, I got appointed to the position.
Now this is because, I mean, this was not normal order, is it? I mean, there was a gentleman who was on that, in that position, but he resigned, and so there was an opening and they needed somebody before this election?
That's correct. The gentleman that I replaced had retired, and so coming up to the presidential election, obviously the position was open, so I was appointed to the position and had to resign my place as a representative up in Jefferson City so that I could be the Director of Elections starting October the 1st of 2012.
Well, which do you find more fulfilling, the job in Jefferson City or working as a director in the Elections Board?
Well, I've been very fortunate over my years. I've had a number of very fulfilling positions in law enforcement, in the state legislature. Each of these positions, including the Director of Elections, offers different opportunities to learn, to tackle new problems. And so each one has its own challenges and rewards to it. And I've kind of addressed this position in a little verbiage that I heard, which says the integrity of the vote is vastly more important than the outcome of the vote, which is why those who benefit from the outcome so vigorously oppose the integrity of it. When a nation does not concern itself with the validity of their own voice, the voice ceases to be heard. And that's a credit to a gentleman by the name of Frank Johnson. And that's kind of the approach that I've taken to this position, that it's very important to make sure that we have credible elections. If we have credible elections, we're going to have credible government.
Mm-hmm. Just so everybody knows, I too am involved in that election process. For a number of years I have been an election official. First I was an assistant supervisor, now they've moved me up to being a supervisor, which means that a Republican and Democrat supervisors are in charge of a room where elections are set up, run, and then broken down, and the results sent back to you. Today we wanted to just cover what goes on in an election and all of the planning, not all, but the major planning that goes on even before Election Day. Let's just start there. Just talk about, what is it like, and you've been through this cycle because now you've had the April elections that you just ran, so you're familiar with all the things that went on beforehand.
Correct. We actually, for the April election, we actually started on December the 11th of 2012 with the process of building the election, and that's when the candidates get to, the open filing begins for candidates. In St. Louis County, we have 90 municipalities plus St. Louis County, plus the fire boards, school boards, and so all of those different entities have the opportunity for candidates to file for elections. So that process started back on December the 11th. On January 22nd, that process closes, so that's when we get the information that allows us to start building the elections.
When you say closes, does that mean that was a filing date? Closing for filing for these offices?
That's correct. They have between December 11th and January 22nd to decide, yes, I'm going to run for this office and file the paperwork and to get recognized by the political subdivision to be able to run. So after the 22nd, at that point, we have a pretty good idea who's going to be running, and we can start building the elections. Now, a lot of people, when we talk about the election process, and I thought this when I came on board in October, that the presidential election would be a much more complicated and difficult election than would be an April election. The difference being in the presidential election in November, we had 76% of the people turn out to vote. That's 565,000 people come out to vote. In this last election, we had about 110,000 people, just short of 111,000 people, a little less than 16% come out to vote. So most people would think that the presidential election is more complicated for us, but it's really not, because in the presidential election we had 115 different ballot styles because of the different state representative candidates or state senate candidates that were running. In the April election, when we built it, we had 443 polling places, and we had a total of where's my number here? 343 different ballot styles. So 115 in November and 343 this time. So the difference is...
Well, explain what you mean by ballot style, just so people understand that.
I will. The difference would be if you live in a municipality, Municipality A, and it has Ward 1, Ward 3, and Ward 5 up for the aldermanic election. Each one of those would have to have a different ballot style so that when you came to vote from your residence, only the alderperson for that particular ward would be on the ballot. So we have to break it down by alderperson, we have to break it down by school district, we have to break it down by fire district. So all of those different political entities have to be mapped out. We have to identify specifically the precinct in which your address falls, what's going to be on the ballot for that, and then build a ballot style specifically for your particular address so that when you come to vote, you are authorized to vote on those issues, and you're not voting on issues you're not authorized to vote on.
People on one side of the street could be voting on one set of issues, or one alderman, and people on the other side of the street voting for somebody else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's true with your state rep races. And this year was particularly complicated because, as you're well aware, after 2010, we went through redistricting across the country because of the census. We do that every 10 years. And so all of the precincts, all of the wards, all of the state rep districts, the state senate districts, all got changed for this year. So not only do we have the problem of that many different ballot styles, we have the problem of people being confused as to which district am I in, where specifically do I live, which polling place do I go to, and who should be, in fact, be on my ballot.
Sometimes people are confused about where they're supposed to go and vote. I'm not quite sure why, but have there been a number of changes of polling places? Have polling places moved, or are basically using the same polling places during each election?
We try to stay as consistent as we can, but again, when we changed the precincts because of the redistricting, some people that used to be in one precinct and voted at polling place A are now in the precinct across the street and are voting at polling place B. So there are a number of them. In the presidential election, we had 449 polling places. We try to keep it fairly consistent. We had 443 in the April. So, but there's always buildings that we use that are not available for whatever the purpose may be, you know, some rehabilitation, some work, some problems. And so there are minor shifts in it, but we try to keep it as consistent as we can. And then we mail out reminders to people a week before the election as to where their polling place is and where they need to go.
Well, in my polling place during the presidential election, it was very busy, but we didn't have the kind of long lines like some people feared. Were there long lines in other parts?
There were long lines in some portions of St. Louis County, and part of this is not necessarily because it's the presidential election. A lot of it has to do with the other ballot initiatives that the General Assembly or different political subdivisions put on the ballot. When you've got constitutional amendments and you have propositions, a lot of which are very lengthy, some voters haven't read those until they actually come to the polling place, and they're reading them either in the touchscreen machine or on the paper ballot. So it takes some people 3 minutes to vote, 4 minutes to vote at a presidential. It takes other people 23 minutes or 24 minutes to vote. So the lines are really determined a lot by the ballot language, and then of course by the preparation that the voter has when they come in and how informed they are and ready to vote.
And there's no legal limit on how long someone can stand in the voting place.
There is not. Once you start to vote, we're going to give you every opportunity that you have to make sure that you understand the process, you understand the language, and you cast your vote the way you want to cast your vote.
So now we've covered the part where it's, so it takes you many weeks to gather all the data, and then you at some point, you think you've got it solid, and then you print the ballots?
We do. We start printing the ballots after that 22nd cutoff date. We start building the elections, and we start printing the ballots. Now, in the April election, that got complicated because there were a dozen cases or so that were involved in the courts. And the courts actually have a cutoff date as to whether Lee can be on the ballot, Lee can't be on the ballot. It depends on the challenges. The judges don't always meet those cutoff dates. So a lot of times we're sending our ballots away to be printed, and then they'll come up the next day and say, Mr. Presser can't be on the ballot, so we're posting signs at the polling place saying, you know, any votes for Mr. Presser don't count. So there's a lot of factors that are involved in this that we really have no control over, that we have to kind of go with the flow.
We had one of those at my polling place, Matt. We had to put signs up by all the voting areas that said that some fellow who was running for a fire board
Correct.
no longer qualified. The court had removed him from the ballot.
That's correct.
And I guess that's the only group that can take people off the ballot, right?
That's correct. Any contest of somebody being eligible to vote, somebody that hasn't paid their taxes or whatever the case may be, there has to be a filing in circuit court, and the circuit court makes that decision. We actually had one challenge that went all the way to the Missouri Supreme Court for this past election, which obviously made the dates that much later when we got the information back. We actually built two elections in, which I'm sure you're aware of, two elections in April, because we had the regular general election, and then we had a Maplewood initiative that came in after the dates, and we had to actually build a totally separate election for that. So in Maplewood, they had to vote twice, once for the general election and once for this proposition.
Okay, so now you've gone through the whole process. People have put in their petitions. They have, you know, decided, yes, I want to be on the ballot. You've now got all this information. You've now printed the ballots. Now what happens? Now election day approaches.
Well, there's still a couple of steps in between there. We print the ballots and we enter the information into the Ivotronics, the touchscreen machines that a lot of people like to use to vote. Then we have to go through what we call logic and accuracy testing to make sure that these machines work the way that they're supposed to work. And so we test them. Then we have a public test on those same machines about a week before the election, where the political parties are welcome to send people in and witness these. We do it open to the public so that they can see that the calibration on the machines, that when you vote for candidate A, you're going to get a vote for candidate A. And so we go through all that for all of the different ballot styles so that everybody can see that it works out properly. And then we actually package up and save those results to show that we're starting from a zero base when we begin. Then about 8 days before the election, we start sending out all the equipment to the different polling places. And as you can imagine, with 443 polling places, it takes us a while to get all the equipment out and into these buildings to get ready to go.
So they're going to schools and churches and other public buildings, right?
And some private buildings, but yes, that's correct. And the buildings will sign a contract with us and let us use their facilities for the day. And then starting about 5 o'clock in the morning on election day, the election judges such as yourself, the supervisors, and who got up at dark 30, come in and start setting up the polling place with all the equipment set up, the tables to come in, where people check in, the polling places where they actually vote, making sure that you know how many ballots you have in your particular polling place, because you could have 3, 4, 5 different ballots because of all those ballot styles, making sure that you understand which list of voters gets which ballot, and hopefully you've got all that completed by 6 o'clock in the morning when the polling places are scheduled to open.
Right. That's a big deal too, opening right at 6 o'clock. But I want to assure people also who don't know, because they're not there, is that all that equipment has seals all over it, and as an election supervisor, one of my jobs is to actually check the seal numbers to make sure that those are the official seals that were put on back at your offices, and that nobody has opened these machines or had any access to these machines to make any changes between the time they left your custody and the time that they'd been sitting in that school, church, or other building.
That's correct. Those machines are actually delivered by a bipartisan team, one Republican, one Democrat. They deliver the machines. They each have to check the seals after the machines are in place, waiting for the poll workers on election day, and sign off on a sheet saying that this machine with this seal number was delivered and is waiting for you. Then, as you said, you as a supervisor and your counterpart from the other political party come in, check those seals together, and you sign off on it, so that we've got that chain of custody, if you will, as to the machines have been sealed, there's been no access to them. And then as you open the machines up, you make sure that there's 0 counts on them to make sure that nothing has occurred during, so over and above the seal check, you're double checking to make sure the machines themselves are at that 0 base that we sent them out at.
Now, there are 2 types. We've got the paper ballot and you've got the touchscreen machines, and anybody who's voted knows that that's the routine right now.
That's correct.
There has been some comment, some complaints about the touchscreen machines as being unreliable. I'd like you just to address why you would use something that people think is unreliable.
Well, I vote myself on a touchscreen, and I will tell you that in St. Louis County, I'm very comfortable with the security of and accuracy of the touchscreen machines. We have these machines in our care and custody all year long. We have technicians that are qualified to do all the work on them, so all that is done by my in-house staff, and any work that's done is done by, again, a bipartisan team of technicians that are qualified to do this. We build the elections. We enter all the election stuff, again, by a bipartisan team. We check it all before it goes out. There's no ability for these machines to connect to the internet, so there's no way to connect outside
They're just plugged into an electric outlet.
That's
right?
Usually they're, and if you get 2 or 3, they're usually what we call daisy chain. So you plug one into an electrical outlet and you plug the others into each other. There's not even ability for them to communicate with each other. It's just for the electricity to pass between one and another. So each one is a self-standing, independent machine that tabulates the information as it's set in. There's 3 different systems in there that record the activities on it. A paper ballot, what we call a PEB, which downloads the votes, and then a card, which actually records everything as you go. So there's 3 different systems that have to balance when we do our audits to make sure that there's no problems with the machine itself. And I will tell you that I have had, shortly after I took this job, I was visited by a group that was very concerned about the opportunity for people to be able to compromise those machines. They told me how they could do it. My comment was to them, I'll set up machines in our training room, come in, you can have full access to them, and show me that you can do it, and we'll be happy to take a second look at it.
And did they?
Well, their response was, well, we can't do it, but we know the people that can. I said, well, just call me, bring those people in, I'll be happy to set up the machines. That's the last I've heard of them, Lee. So obviously we keep good control of our machines, and I keep our technicians well certified to make sure that those machines are in good operating order.
I remember one election, this was a number of years ago, there was a woman who was beyond the 25-foot mark outside the building, so she was legal, and she had papers that she was handing out to voters as they were coming in to vote. And these all said, don't use those voting machines because they're all wired right straight into the George Bush headquarters. And there was nothing that we could do to straighten that situation out, knowing that that's not true, but nevertheless, there is considerable misinformation. And I can tell, because normally there's a pretty good usage of touchscreen, but when there is a lot of misinformation, all of a sudden you can see that the usage of paper ballots goes up.
That's correct. I mean, there were several publicized stories in November around the presidential election of people that were having concerns about the machines, and so I think that there were some voters that changed their normal way of voting from the touchscreens to paper. But again, in all of my limited experience, obviously since October 1st, our touchscreens are very accurate, they're very consistent. The only concerns we've had have been, some people will say I pushed this button, but I know from using my own iPad, sometimes I think I hit an icon and I don't necessarily hit it correctly, and I got to go back and hit it a second time. We check the calibration and everything is fine.
Mm-hmm. There was some comment in other states, not in Missouri, about people who claimed that they would touch one name, and then when you go back and look at the review, somebody else had been voted for. You had heard that also?
Yes, I have.
And was this wives' tales, or was this actually happening?
Well, again, I think that there are instances where people will, when you put 2 candidates, say president, candidate A, candidate B, one's right above the other one, and if you don't hit specifically on the icon that you're looking for, sometimes you could send the wrong signal. Mm-hmm. And there is an opportunity there because you check and double check before you actually cast your vote to make sure that you're voting for the correct people. So again, I've not seen any instances where people definitely hit the icon for candidate A and voted for candidate B. There are instances, like I say, where people, and in my extended age, I'm getting there, where I go to hit an icon and I don't hit it as squares, but I need to hit it. Mm-hmm. But again, the machines themselves are checked for that logic and accuracy. They're all calibrated, and they're all working well when they're sent out to the polling places. And if we have those concerns that are voiced to us on election day, we send technicians out to check the calibration and recalibrate them and make sure there's no problems.
Now, as a supervisor, at 7 o'clock, we close the doors in Missouri.
Correct.
And
7 p.m.
7 p.m. And we lock up, and we the supervisors, the assistants, and the table workers are the only people who are in there. And we go through a routine, and we fill out a bunch of paperwork, and it goes into various pouches and bags. And then, and let me assure people that on those touchscreen machines, we take the paper tape out, and it gets secured. We take a flash card out, and it is secured, and this PEB, which also has been recorded into, and it is secured, and they are actually in sealed bags.
Correct.
You know, these are not like where anybody can get at. There are actual seals that are put on these things. And then we take it to a predetermined location where we drop off and we sign for it.
Correct.
So what happens at that point? We have now dropped off all these ballot results to this parking lot somewhere, and some of your people are collecting all this. Now what?
You drop those off to our deputies and roving deputies. Each deputy is assigned X number of polling places to pick up the media from and bring it back into our office. When they bring the information back into headquarters, all of the data that you refer to is all scanned to make sure that we have it all, that it's all accounted for. It is separated at our office, and the different media goes into different locations for the votes to be tabulated. So we go through at that point while we have different sections of people that are tabulating all of the supplies that you've returned. The actual votes themselves, once they're accounted for on the PEBs or the flashcards or the M100 cards, go into the tabulation room, which is secured, and nobody can get in there except our tabulation team, where these things are starting to be tabulated. So the first tabulations we run are from the absentee balloting, which has been going on for 45 days before the election, and then we start running the actual ballots that come in from that day's election.
So initially on television, when they show those early results, and it often says less than 1%, those are the absentee ballots that of people who had voted before Election Day.
That's correct. We have 5 days before the election to start opening those absentee ballots that we receive, and then we start counting them when the polls start closing. So we don't tabulate the votes beforehand. We do open them, we do prep them, we do run them through, but we don't start tabulating them until the polls are closed at 7 o'clock. So we start running those at 7, and then what we try to do right now is about every half hour, I stop the tabulation process, I ask for a printout, we take that printout of the votes, post that on our website so that the candidates and the people behind the different issues, the media, can get an idea as to what the tabulation is. Then we go for another half hour and we do it again that way. And that way we get a consistent flow of information out, but we don't have to stop the tabulation process every 5 or 10 or 15 minutes.
Now at the end, when you're looking at the online screen from your office, it says down there, well, this is not a certified vote.
That's correct.
Right? This is all
unofficial.
Unofficial.
That's correct.
Even after they've declared the winners on TV, these are actually unofficial numbers. That's right?
Correct. That's
okay.
Correct.
So what happens between that night and official?
Well, we continue processing to make sure we check, double check, and triple check all the media that we're referring to make sure that all the votes are accounted for. Then we go into what's known as the audit process. We have 2 weeks after the date of the election to certify the election. So we actually go back through and we audit every race, and we specify certain races at random that we go through, and we hand count everything just to make sure that there's no anomalies that have shown up on election day. And so before we actually certify it to the Secretary of State, it's gone through this very detailed audit process by a trained audit team to account for everything and identify any potential problems. And so it's that 2-week period that, which is actually today from the race 2 weeks ago. Well, actually, it was a week ago that we certified, and then today is the date that anybody that wants to challenge has the opportunity to file in court. They have to file by today if they want any recounts or anything.
Today being April 23rd, 2013.
That's correct. It's
right.
3 weeks after that. 1 week after certification, they have that 7-day period to be able to file if they want any recounts or challenges.
And you always have a bipartisan team, as you call it, but what you're saying is that there's always at least a Democrat and a Republican in the room whenever any of this stuff is being handled.
Absolutely. The room, all our rooms are set up, our tab room and our ballot counting room. You can't get in any of these rooms unless there's one Republican and one Democrat that both have their access, and only certain people are coded for access, can open up and go in. So the way we have the room secured ensures that you have to have a representative of each party present to open the room up.
And so after this audit process occurs and you, quote, certify, what does certify mean?
Certify says that we've gone back through the audit, that everything counts, and we're certifying it. The Board of Election Commissioners then signs off on the certification saying we've gone through the entire process, there's no anomalies, there's no problems, we're certifying the results of that election. It gets sent out to the public, it gets sent to the Missouri Secretary of State's office, and then gets posted as the final results for that particular election. And then, like I say, there's still 7 days for people that we had one race that there's only one vote difference. So there's that 7-day opportunity for that candidate to determine, do I want to challenge this? Am I okay with the results of the race? And so forth. So that is that period after.
So in a race where there is a 1 or even 2, 3, 5, 10 vote difference, are you paying a lot more attention to that particular series of ballots?
I don't say we're paying more attention. Obviously, we want to certify that every race is correct. And so we've got teams assigned to make sure that all of the votes are counted and counted properly. But we make sure that those races that are extremely close actually go through the full audit process to see whether or not there's any problems.
Now there had been, and we got about 3 minutes here, there was an anomaly in a race which was very close in the Clayton area. And I think that one candidate won by 1 vote, but then it turned out that the poll workers had made a mistake. Is that right?
That was before I came on board. That's when I was still a state representative. But there had been some ballots for a state representative race that, again, there was multiple ballots at the polling place, and some individuals that should have gotten ballot A got ballot B. So they had the opportunity to vote for the wrong individual. So that race was rerun, and because, again, it was close, those 2 candidates competed against each other one more time.
So you had to actually rerun the entire state rep race.
That's correct. It was the 87th district race.
And I believe the same person who won by 1 vote won that race.
That's correct.
Didn't she?
That's correct.
Okay, so like we just have a couple minutes left here, is there any quick comments that you wanted to make about your job or anything to do with the election process?
I think there is one thing that I would love to add, and that is to thank people like yourself who work in the polling places. We have, in the presidential primary, we had 5,300 poll workers like yourself out working. In the April election, we had 3,500. Without good, qualified individuals that give their full attention to this process, the process has the opportunity to break down. And so without those volunteers, actually it's a paid position, but without those people coming out and working with us to ensure the credibility of these elections, it would be very, very difficult. We are always looking for good individuals that want to have impact in those particular races to make sure that the credibility of our election process stands up. And so I know that you've been kind enough to put up my phone number and my email address. Anybody that would be willing to come forth and be a poll judge for us, either a Democrat or Republican poll judge, please let us know, and we'll have the right individuals get in touch with you to sign you up, make sure that you have the right training. As you know, all of these individuals go through extensive training before we send them out to do it, because we do owe it to the citizens of St. Louis County, to the voters of St. Louis County, to make sure that we run good, fair, and quality elections.
And don't worry, it is scary when you're first doing this the first time or two, but then after that, it really does become kind of routine.
It is. I mean, it's a very logical process, and if people will follow the instructions, we've got a step-by-step, as you're well aware, all those sheets are basically step-by-step. It is a logical process. If you follow the sheets, follow the picture directions that we have for you, and then call us with any questions, it is not that difficult. It is a long day. It is a 13-hour day from the opening of the polls to the end, but we do really appreciate it and really need good help.
Thank you very much for coming and discussing the St. Louis County Election Board of Elections and the process. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And
I've been speaking with Gary Fuhr. He is the Republican director of the St. Louis County Board of Election. To those of you who want other people to see it, go to YouTube. This is there. Show it to them. Thanks. Bye.